I now want to open our webinar. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our monthly IP4OS webinar. Many of you already know that IP4OS, meaning Intellectual Property for Open Science, is a Horizon Europe project. I just told Richard that it's only for 2 years. And this project develops practical strategies, tools, and training to help researchers, but also institutions, navigate intellectual property within an open science ecosystem. And it supports as open as possible, as closed as necessary knowledge valorization by aligning agile IP/R management with fair R research outputs. And our today's topic is dedicated to open science as IP strategy. My name is Katharina Miller. I'm from the IP4OS partner Miller International Knowledge, which is a multidisciplinary law firm based in Spain, in Madrid. And I have the pleasure of guiding you through today's event as your moderator. And it's a real honor to welcome Professor Richard Gold. You are Distinguished James McGill Professor in Intellectual Property and Innovation at McGill's University Faculty of Law, where you also serve as Director of the Center for Intellectual Property Policy. In addition, and it was not so easy to find all your titles because you're in many different projects. You are an associate member of the Department of Genetics within McGill's Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences and the Bielo School of the Environment. And you also today, I saw that your speech is done from Conscience, the project that you're also with. And your work lies at the intersection of innovation, development, and commerce, with a particular focus on biotechnology. And your research has appeared in many leading journals, including Science, Nature Biotechnology, The Lancet, PLOS Medicine, eLife, and many others. And the heart of today's topic is the idea that open science seeks to accelerate research and innovation through a thoughtful and strategic use of intellectual property. And because, as you say yourself, always, there's no single way to practice open science. There's also no universal IP model that fits every case. And those leading OS initiatives must combine and adapt different IP tools, both formal and informal, to best serve the objectives of each project, which is the challenge. And this webinar will explore how to develop an IP strategy that supports and advances project goals, showing how openness can become a strategic strength rather than a challenge. And before we begin, just a quick note. After Professor Gold's presentation, we will hold a Q&A session, so you are able to ask your questions in the chat, which I will enable in a second. And you're warmly invited to submit your questions in this chat at any time during the presentation, and I will collect these questions and then share them with Professor Gold at the end of his presentation. So, but now I think I have spoken a lot. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katharina. I'm just loading up the slides. Hello, everyone. I hope you can see the slides okay. Let me know if I'm wrong. Thank you for joining. I know 2:30 is in Europe is not necessarily the easiest time for everyone. It's either the end of lunch or coffee break, depending on where you are. Here it's morning and very snowy here, which I expect is not the case in Madrid. So as Katharina said, I wear different titles. Most of them are unpaid, so don't be overly impressed. But my chief job is as a professor at McGill. I'm in the Faculty of Law, but because my research crosses disciplinary boundaries, I'm also, as Katharina mentioned, in the medicine and in School of the Environment. But I'm also talking to you as the Chief Policy and Partnerships Officer at Conscience. Conscience is a non-profit corporation in Canada. It's funded through a grant from the government of Canada to support open science drug discovery, particularly in areas where the market isn't providing solutions. And that includes pandemic preparedness, antimicrobial resistance, rare diseases, and even some forms of complex diseases such as neurodegenerative diseases. I'll talk a little bit about that as I go on. The essential problem I want to address today, and maybe this is old hat for you, but worth repeating, is that there is an inherent bias in the industry against openness. For decades, we've been building products successfully in pharma, in IT, in other areas, through proprietary means by constructing walls around what we develop, what I call the fortress model. We have an idea, we build protection around it, multiple layers of protection in order to provide us with a market advantage that allows us to attract investment and move forward. But that bias is coming under attack given the changes in the way we do technology. AI is clearly one source of that friction, but also just the complexity of research, the increasing focus on interdisciplinary research, the need to share data, the need to share and build upon others' work. And so, the European Union has recognized this through the Open Science Cloud, and various other governments have got together with UNESCO to come up with recommendations around open science. But we still haven't had that permeate the mindset of many of the people who are directing research. And frankly, for a lot of researchers in university, they're just told, you have to get a patent and then we'll worry about what to do with it. But as James Boyle mentions, this bias can actually undervalue the importance of sharing. And that's really what I want to talk about. How do we take into account this desire to have IP with the reality that setting up a fortress model actually is counterproductive in many areas of science and technology? And so what I want to talk to you about is thinking about the role of open science as a strategy. Open science and IP are not even working at the same level. Open science is a strategy about how one develops one's technology. And it's a business strategy that focuses on the need to share knowledge, because by sharing it, we get people with different skill sets, and addressing the elephant in the room. Maybe it's no longer an elephant, it's bigger than that, which is rising research costs, right? It takes more money to develop fewer drugs today than it did 25 years ago. There was a slight hope towards the beginning of the 2020s, but that has gone away. And it has resulted in firms finding it very difficult to raise money. If you look at the top 20 biopharmaceutical firms in the world, their total valuation is much less than that of NVIDIA alone. So one company has a market share much higher. And that's because there's relatively little money from venture capital being made available to biotech. And when they do make it available, it is in big projects, so it doesn't get spread out. Many firms are finding it therefore difficult to actually fund their research. And that's where lowering the cost of research becomes particularly important, and why open science as a strategy to do that is critical. So open science, as I said, is built on teams, sharing knowledge, not just individuals working in their garage or Thomas Edison in his laboratories. And the goal is to drive innovation, decrease cost, and for many countries, increase productivity. So that's the goal of open science. I'll come back to that. So that's the goal of open science. What I want to talk about today is how do we mesh IP within that strategy framework? What are the tools that IP offers that we can incorporate into our open science strategy? To give you some examples of what open science partnerships built around, so these are partnerships aiming to develop certain products, but they use open science as a strategy. So to give you some examples of that. And then I want to talk about how to implement this. What are the practical steps to implement? What are the roles of the different actors within the ecosystem to do that? And then I look forward to hearing your comments and receiving your questions. So what is open science? And different people define this differently. One of the issues here is that there is no common definition, but this is what I mean by open science, and hopefully that's helpful. First of all, it's based on transparency. So it's based on open sharing of the data, the processes, and so on, where we open ourselves up to others reviewing it. We know that there is a crisis of replication. Open science helps address that by being transparent. Someone else can replicate my research and see what it's doing. They can also find ways to improve my processes. And so the idea is, by being transparent, we are both encouraging the development of replication studies, but also of people to take that knowledge perhaps in a completely new direction and improve on it. Accessibility, so that this data is not only open, but it's findable, it's accessible, interoperable, right? I can't even speak today. It's too early in the morning. I need a second cup of coffee. Anyway, you're used to that. Collaboration. Most of these open science projects are not single discipline. It's where you need an AI researcher, a biotech researcher, maybe an engineer, maybe a social scientist to come together in order to solve a problem. Often these are global partnerships and so on. So open science works best when it's facilitating the development and operation of a collaboration. And in those contexts, we want to lower the costs of sharing knowledge so that people can access it quickly in order to build on it. Equity is another concern, that we want to make sure that the knowledge is developed without regard to geography or the particular institution. This really comes out of what we saw from COVID, the pandemic, where there was hoarding of the technology, of the knowledge. So the South African hub being promoted by the World Health Organization could get access to any of the technology developed by Pfizer or by Moderna, or even a public lab that was spun off of University of British Columbia for the nanolipid particle. And so there's a recognition that equity requires that this knowledge be accessible and that we can't put up artificial barriers. It also, as part of open science, includes a responsibility to share and steward that knowledge, not only for today, but for tomorrow. How do we build our open data sets in a way that they're reliable, we can trust them, that is, they have to be of high quality, and that they're also built for tomorrow, not only for today. And that means that we need to design the process from the beginning to be open. We have to spend time designing how we're going to collect data, where we're going to put it, what kind of fields are in it, what kind of software will access it, and so on. And then finally, we need to find ways to keep this going. Many open science projects, as many scientific projects, are supported by public funds, but at some point those public funds and how do we ensure the long-term viability of the project? So within this, IP is a tool. And having practiced intellectual property law and worked with firms in various IT and health sectors as a lawyer, the first thing one looks at is, what are the tools available to help my client achieve its goals? And IP is among those tools. It's not the only one. And IP is not one thing. It is a series of things, and I'll come back to that. But it's a tool to help the firm or the lab accomplish its goals by creating artificial exclusivities, right? Once knowledge is out there, normally anybody else can use it without having to pay for the cost of producing those ideas. So IP creates these bubbles that last for a certain period of time. They're all time restricted in order to give the holder of the IP a little bit of room to go on the market without competition, allowing them to charge higher rates, higher prices for their goods in order to first attract financing and then build the infrastructure needed to manufacture and deliver whatever they have. But IP is not free. It's not free to consumers because obviously when you put a product on the market without competition, consumers are paying a higher cost, which means that some consumers are not able to access that technology. And when we're talking about life-saving medicines, that is not an insignificant cost. Some forms of IP, and there are a variety again, cause delay or decreased disclosure. Patents, for example, you must keep secret, particularly in Europe, until you actually file for the IP. And even then, it's a bad idea to share because you might have to modify your IP. There might be subsequent patents that you're seeking as you find out more information. So the effect is to delay the actual disclosure of information, and in some cases, decrease it by many years, if not a decade. It's also not free, or at least some forms of IP are not free. So patents in particular are expensive. You have to apply jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Yes, there is the European patent conventions allowing you to get protection throughout Europe. But if you want protection in the United States, or you want protection in Canada or Japan or many other markets, you have to pay for it. The costs depend on how complicated the technology is. You have to translate it. So it could cost up to $10,000 per jurisdiction to acquire a patent. And if you have multiple patents, you have to multiply that. Also, they're not free to enforce. You have to find out who is actually using the invention and commence a suit. And that could be quite expensive to find. And then once you get to court in the United States, it costs at least $2.5 to $3 million per side, and that's for a simple case. And it can easily go to $5 or $6 million per side. So there's a very high cost that a small firm in particular may not be able to afford. There are some mechanisms available to help them address this, but a small firm suing, for example, a large firm is at a major disadvantage. And then to the extent that we need to share knowledge, that we need to build teams, there are transaction costs, and these take the form of negotiating contracts, which can take months, if not a year or more. There's the cost of figuring out what's in the background, what's in the foreground, how we're going to go forward. It gets very complicated both to set up, but also to manage all this IP. So in that context, that IP both has advantages, that it helps firms acquire investment to undertake their research and build the infrastructure to deliver it to the market, but also come with costs. We have to ask, how do we use this tool in a way to serve OS? OS, as I said, we adopt it because we need to have teamwork. We need to have diverse sets of knowledge. We need to accelerate the research, and we need to bring down costs. So what forms of IP get us there? So we need enough money to be able to protect, give us a little bit of elbow room in order to raise funds. But there are a whole bunch of different types of things that we can do to or protect to serve that. It could be our brand, it could be a service, an end product. It doesn't have to be everything. So we need to be very careful in selecting what it is we need IP over, what's critical to be able to raise money. The central idea, though, of an IP strategy here has to be to keep the foundational knowledge, that is the data, the methods, the materials, and tools, as open as possible. And the reason, again, is to accelerate collective progress in the science. We also can separate out who benefits from the IP from who controls it. It's usually a good idea to have one entity control the IP, but with an obligation to use it in a way that benefits the members who are part of the consortium, but also the entire community. So our goal here is to find IP that's compatible with an overarching open science strategy. And there are a variety of tools that actually serve this. And I'm going to come back to the first one, regulatory exclusivities. These are extremely powerful and inexpensive, and they're more compatible with disclosure than our patents, because you can fully share this knowledge without jeopardizing your right to get them. There are some restrictions on them. They only apply to drugs or other health interventions, so they don't exist in other fields. So it's a very valuable tool within drug development, for example, or biologics, vaccines, etc. There's also branding and trademarks. So where you can attract investment through either reputation or a collective mark that basically shows people that your studies are strong, and if they work with you, it enhances your clients' reputations. Protecting the trademarks could be quite effective. You have to be on the market to be able to access it, but again, trademarks are relatively inexpensive, both in terms of acquiring and enforcing, and they're completely compatible with sharing knowledge. Trade secrets, on the other hand, are not compatible with sharing, but sometimes inevitable. Sometimes they're embedded in the very processes we use and hard to disclose anyway without people working actually together. So they're a natural part of any research project, but they do not lead to open sharing. And patents, as I mentioned before, have a certain cost, a significant cost. And while in theory they can support sharing, in practice they do not. So I want to go back to regulatory exclusivities. This is based on legislation in high-income countries that basically says when you go to a drug regulator to ask for approval to sell a drug or biologic or whatever on the market, that they will not approve anybody else who seeks approval for the same drug for the same indication. And this lasts, depending on jurisdiction, depending on the type of technology, between 5 and 12 years. Europe is 10 years. And the idea here is that you get to sell exclusively on the market for that indication for this period. And if someone else goes to the drug regulator and says, well, I can manufacture the same thing at the same quality, they'll say no until until this is expired, which is a considerable protection. Another thing about it is there are no enforcement costs, because it's the government that enforces it by simply not granting approval to go on the market. They're also almost 100% effective, unlike patents in the United States. Over the last 30 years, about 43 to 46% of patents are held invalid, and it depends on the country and the jurisdiction, but there's a high likely or possibility of invalidity. You can acquire these rights right from the beginning, even though you only get them once you've got approval, but we've got some projects to try to change that to get earlier protection. And so you can still sell your product midway to a larger firm and transfer the ability to collect this right. And what's most important is it's completely compatible with sharing, unlike patents. Okay, so talked about several forms of IP. Let me get into some examples, and I've mentioned this right at the top, so I'll go through it quickly. When are open science models better than ones built around a fortress, proprietary ones, as I mentioned before, where we need access to high quality shared data, where no one firm can collect it? So this is true of AI and genomics, etc. It also is important for complex multidisciplinary diseases where frankly, patents have not served us well. While there are some two drugs for Alzheimer's, neither one of them is particularly effective, and they have multiple side effects. They don't work particularly well in women. So for decades, we've been trying to find this, and we haven't. And I think largely that's because we've been working in silos. Other areas it doesn't work is for rare diseases. 95% of rare diseases don't even have one treatment. Areas of uncertainty, such as antimicrobial resistance, widely accepted that the market is not functioning currently to develop these. Firms are moving out of the area. It also, OS works where technology is moving really quickly. AI is one of those areas where having a patent, which takes several years to acquire, isn't very valuable because by the time the patent comes out, the technology has moved on. And there are other areas where the patent protection is pretty narrow. Synthetic biology, very easy to get around those patents. It's not really worth acquiring them. And we've seen examples of how OS can work. So AlphaFold, which won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, was based on an open data set called the Protein Data Bank, completely following fair principles, no patents, nothing. And it only achieved its goal because of that openness. But we don't have openness in other areas of science. And so there's a concern we may not get the equivalent of AlphaFold in other areas. And one way we do this is through open science partnerships, where we create a partnership aiming to develop a particular set of technologies. Could be neurodegenerative diseases, could be rare diseases, etc., and use open data materials and forms of IP that are compatible with sharing, for example, regulatory exclusivities. The reason they do this is to simplify contracting. We know that IP is the major roadblock, especially when dealing with universities. And so eliminating limiting patents helps solve it. Regulatory exclusivities are much easier to contract for, as are trademarks. And because we're sharing, we can avoid duplication of effort, which is a major driver of costs. It also helps us attract philanthropic investment where they're more interested in creating knowledge. So even if the project doesn't succeed in developing a new drug, the knowledge will drive the next research effort. And there are many examples of this. The Structural Genomics Consortium, which does various things in terms of the three-dimensional model of proteins, and it led in part to the AlphaFold. Odin, which is in Denmark. AI-driven structure-enabled antiviral platform, ASAP, is based in the UK, and Nucleus is in synthetic biology out of California. One example that we're working on through Conscience is we call CASH, Critical Assessment of Computational Hit Finding Experiments. Its goal is to accelerate AI-assisted drug delivery. Now, there's lots of hype about this. You hear from all over the place, but effectively, AI is pretty poor at predicting molecules. And there's a general recognition of this in the industry. So large pharma wants to know, well, why, what works? Is this really something we should be looking at? And if we should be looking at it, what kinds of AI? How should it be combined with other technologies? AI firms want to improve their models, which, as I said, are not very good. They want to test new approaches that may be promising, but they also want to showcase their work to pharma. The SGC does lab work. They've got a huge reputation among pharma firms for high quality research. So they test out the predictions made by AI firms and give results back. The molecule supply firms are obviously interested because they provide molecules here. So what happens is we actually test out real molecules, and then Conscience, my organization, manages this. It sets up these 18-month-long competitions where we identify a target. The AI firms use their algorithms and models to predict hundreds of potential molecules. The molecule supplier supplies those to the SGC. The SGC puts them through the lab, and the results are shared first with AI firms, but then after a short period with the general public. So the AI firms can use that data in order to improve their models, and the general public and other AI competitors can see what's going on. And in terms of drug development, there's tested molecules out there that could be the basis of future drug discovery efforts. So our goal is to improve everyone by sharing knowledge. We're very early stage in AI-assisted drug discovery. We want to break through the hype and show what's actually working. The overall conclusion is that the AI predictions are better than chance, but not much better than that. We're hoping through a succession of these competitions, we're already on competition 7, that we will slowly see an improvement in the predictions based on past participation in the competition. The AI firms keep all their IP, but they must share a description of their approach so that the pharmaceutical firms and others know basically the kinds of approaches. So we try to balance off IP here with open sharing. All the data, all the predictions, all the molecules are open to the public, but the AI firms maintain proprietary rights over their model, and their IP. The value of that IP gets enhanced as they win awards and as they show improvement. To show that you have participated in a cash competition and done well should help you attract financing, but also attract interest of pharmaceutical companies. So how did we develop it? It started with a conversation between the pharma partners and the Structural Genomics Consortium, who recognized the need for some type of competition. Very much worried that there are tons of companies with their 5 PowerPoint slides saying we're the best and showing you selective data, but there was no way to actually assess whether their claims were good. And so the idea of benchmarking and of setting up a competition came to life. They selected Conscience to manage this competition, and we entered into an agreement, a fairly extensive one, that covers how we're going to govern this, how we're going to pick the targets, what are the criteria for determining whether something works or not, who's going to fund it. For example, the Structural Genomics Consortium put in, the pharma have put in, and through government funding, Conscience has funded this, but also all the AI firms pay to participate in this. So we're not subsidizing them, except for Canadian firms, because the Canadian government asked us to. It set up the scope of the competitions, how they're going to work, how we're going to release the data, how do we ensure its quality, etc. The board identifies the targets that will be the subject matter of the competition, and then Conscience manages the actual launch of the competition, advertising it, attracting firms. We only attract 25 at a time just because of the flow through at the SGC, and then the SGC does the laboratory work to test it. We give the data back. There's a second round where a handful of firms out of the 25 go forward, and that data is collected, and then the whole thing is released to the public. So if we go back and use cash as an example, how does it work? How do you build an IP strategy for OS? Well, the first thing is you have to define your goal. And we often miss this, especially universities. We're told patent first, as I said before, and then figure out what you want to do. But that's actually backwards. When I was practicing law, you always start with, what is the client trying to do? What are you trying to develop a pre-competitive tool? Are you trying to develop a pharmaceutical product? Are you trying to serve the social good, for example, for philanthropy? Or are you doing something else? You have to be very clear about what you're doing, and then think about how open science achieves that. Once you have that goal, then you start matching the IP to the goal. And it's not just one form of IP and that's it. Most firms have layers of IP, and so you can combine them in order to achieve your goal. So you can take different approaches to this. One could say, especially in the pre-competitive space, you could say, look, let's be open at the beginning and we'll allow IP to come in later. So let's build the base of knowledge, maybe some molecules that we agree won't be patented in order to have proof of concept. Once we have that, the firms then compete. This is the strategy underlying the Structural Genomics Consortium, where all the data on all protein structures are made public to everyone at the same time. Each firm thinking, once I have that, I'm going to be able to outcompete my competitors. So there are many examples of this type of thing. Odin works on a similar type of strategy. You might decide, I'm Michael J. Fox Foundation looking at Parkinson's. Development has been slow. My goal here is to maximize the sharing of knowledge in order to help at some point in the future a pharmaceutical firm develop something. But my consortium is built around sharing and ensuring that whenever I fund a drug project, that knowledge, even if the drug doesn't work, helps advance the next set of researchers. Or you may work on brand-based exclusivity. So in synthetic biology, this might be the way to go. High quality synthetic biology products. Patents aren't really useful, as I said, because they're easy to circumvent. So privileged relationships with customers, a brand that means something, could be in a very effective way to do this. And of course, we can combine different forms of IP. Once you've figured that out, then you have to go into actually building the network, building the partnership. And you have to figure out the model. Is there going to be one central actor who controls everything with a bunch of different actors participating in certain aspects, called the hub and spoke model? Or is this truly a network model where everybody is working on it and they're collaborating and there is no central hub? So cash would be a network model. The SGC would be more of a hub and spoke model. So you have to figure out what's the structure, and you can have a combination of these. So some of your spokes could be networks. The participants in a network could be a hub and spoke type of partnership. Then you have to figure out who's paying for this, how, at what time, what are our KPIs, what are the rules to join the partnership, to exit the partnership, and then you implement open science clauses. What critically must be shared, how, when, under what conditions, how do we ensure quality? So you need to build that into your agreement. And we have an example of a contract that does all this, and I'll link to it in a couple of moments. So once we've done this, we have a partnership running. But I wanted also to talk about, well, who within these partnerships take on which responsibility. So there's usually some set of initial partners who are motivated to set up a partnership. So for cash, it was the pharma firms and the SGC. They define the overarching goals, their KPIs, and the nature of their relationship. But then they hand off responsibility to executives who are responsible for actually putting this together, coordinating it, setting up monitoring mechanisms, adapt, because your initial take usually needs adaptation. There's things that work, things that don't. We bring in lawyers to actually draft the agreement, who help design the IP strategy. When does different IP come in? How do we acquire it? Who controls it? And gives general advice on governance. Then we have people who have to administer the IP on the ground, and often these are at universities or at institutes. They need to identify the IP coming in. What are the rules about using that? What kind of data infrastructure do we have? How do we ensure national security, if there are any national security issues, ensure regulatory compliance? And then there are people actually doing the work, the researchers. So their job is, and we want to free them up as much as possible to generate data, to access the data as quickly as possible, to share tools. How do we make their lives easier with the fewest type of agreements getting in the way, the fewest approvals so that they can really collaborate? And finally, the larger set of partners and collaborators who are sharing resources, providing feedback. How do we implicate them in the project? And if we're just looking at this from a workflow point of view, so first, identify what the project goals are and the scope of the project. You can't do everything. So most of these open science projects, partnerships have a particular goal. It could be accelerate AI assisted drug development, as with cash. It could be develop preclinical tools to accelerate drug discovery. It could be to identify new approaches to drug discovery, so get proof of principle and then allow competition. It could be to bring a drug for a rare disease to market. So we first need to define the scope, and then, and only then, do we start asking the question about, well, what kind of IP serves that goal? So we reversing what we're often told. You start off with IP, then develop a plan. No, you start with a plan and then ask yourself what kind of IP. This saves a whole bunch of expenses. Otherwise, you may be applying for patents that are not needed, and all the expense that goes with it. It also can actually undermine the sharing of the research. So it's really important that the IP plan serves the overall open science plan. And then once we have those agreements in place, we actually have to build the infrastructure, the repositories, the data governance, and this is far from free. So who's going to build it? Is it going to be government? Is it going to be the consortium? Who within the consortium? Often this will be a public-private effort with some government funding and some private funding. How do we ensure its sustainability? And then we actually have to do the research and share openly. So we have to make sure the researchers are equipped to know what the standards are for the data and the material sharing, but also upload it. And most researchers don't want to do that. So we have to find mechanisms to fund the uploading of data and material through the consortium. And then finally, we need to track our outputs, adapt our KPIs as we learn what works and what doesn't, and publicize outcomes. So the overall lesson, and then I'll open it up to questions, is not to think about IP as the enemy of open science or of open science as being the enemy of IP, but it's to recognize that IP is simply a tool. A contract is a tool. It serves a greater purpose. The greater purpose is, what is the organization trying to do? And if what they're trying to do is best accommodated through open science, how does IP serve those goals? And that means our selection of tools and the way we deploy them becomes critically important. We've recognized, or at least I've said, that there is no there's no one open science approach, which means there's no one IP approach. It really has to be customized to the particular participants, the stage of research, the type of research, the role that data plays as opposed to products, etc. So you really have to create this, which is a great news for lawyers, I guess, but also technology transfer agents, valorization people, etc. So you start with your goal. You develop an IP strategy, and then you implement it in that order, while always being flexible, while always recognizing that what we start off with may not succeed. So I had mentioned our OSAT toolkit. These are extracted from existing open science partnerships. You can find them there, and I'm happy to share the link later on. So these are kind of standard agreements that you can use as the starting point for your own drafting, and it deals with many of the aspects that I talked about. And if you're interested in finding out more about cash, you can go to that website. So I just want to acknowledge all the people that have funded me. So Ravi Menon, whose picture there, heads Trident, which is funding a lot of my research through the New Frontiers in Research Fund, which is from the government of Canada. CleoNet is funded by Genome Canada and genome centers across Canada. So thank you, and now happy to take questions.
Wow, Richard, thank you so much for this truly very insightful and fascinating presentation, because you give us a very valuable perspective on how OS can actually become a strong IP strategy. I like this idea about thinking of strategy. I think this is so useful. And yeah, doing or having a strategy that transforms openness, in fact, into a competitive advantage rather than a risk. I think this is very unique. Yeah, thank you very much. And I really appreciate your point that IP should be seen as a tool, not an end in itself. And how well-designed governance models, like the example from the Cash project, can make openness both collaborative and sustainable. This is also quite unique, I think, for us here in Europe. And I think you have also shown with great clarity that OS is not, in your words, an enemy or an anti-IP, but rather a strategic way to accelerate innovation while ensuring fairness, trust, and even value creation for everyone involved. So, Richard, thank you so much again for this great presentation. And now I also have spoken enough and would love to see if our participants have questions. If not, I can already start, because in the meantime, now with the social media, I have received, you wouldn't, yeah, via LinkedIn, I have received 2 questions. And the first one, I will read it to you, yeah? Professor Gold, you emphasize that open science works best when it combines limited exclusivity with broad openness. Could you elaborate on how project leaders can practically find that balance, especially in environments where there's still a strong protection first mindset? Oh, yeah.
Yes, and it's a great question, and something we encounter all the time. In fact, within Conscience, we have a program called OSAS. We like our acronyms, Open Science Advisory Services, where we actually work with researchers, with SMEs, to try to build this. At this stage, there's just not enough experience that, we can just pull off models and then adapt them. We're custom building them at this point. But the general outline of the process I talked about is what we would work through. So yes, you have to get over the closed mindset. And that is done through education programs like this. We have videos that talk about it. IP4OS is doing a good job. So it's getting to especially the universities where this mindset is. Accelerators also often promote it. And it's giving not a counter narrative, but a supplementary narrative. Many universities just don't have the resources to even teach IP properly, let alone openness. There's not, I don't see much resistance. People are more skeptical or not about open science, but there's general recognition that it's a tool, that it can be highly successful. And so we need to keep talking about it. So that helps us get over the mindset problem. But after that, we need real help. We need people who are trained in understanding what open science is and the different modalities to implement it through IP. So if you talk to a patent lawyer, you're just going to get patents as the answer. We need more general trained lawyers who understand that there's a variety of them. So I was a corporate lawyer, not an IP lawyer. And so my goal was always, what does my client want? Sometimes, what should my client want? Because they don't always know what they want. And sometimes, I've had clients who said, I want to maintain control. Well, that's a really bad idea because no one's going to give you money, right? So you have to understand what does the client need to do? And then what are the series of tools I have? I have contracts, I have regulations, I have IP, I have a variety of things I can do, partnerships, collaborations, reputation I can build. How do I build a strategy around that? But you have to have a generalist perspective to be able to pick and choose. Yeah, if I'm going to apply for a patent, you're not going to come to me, you're going to go to a patent agent, but you should only go to the patent agent once you know. And universities tend to patent early the wrong things in the wrong way. We need people. Cash is trying to build that. So we have a program where if they find someone who has that experience, we, at least for Canadian companies, we help subsidize it.
Mhm.
We pay up to a third of the cost. But that's what's going to take is finding these experts. And I'm hoping IP4OS is actually creating the experts who will provide that advice.
I'm really getting excited, more and more excited. And I have to tell you now that this year within MIC, we have trying very hard to be present in many events where only lawyers are present. And it was like, what are you talking? So when we tried to start the conversation on open science, they were like, so the most polite ones were like, oh, what is open science? Yeah. And it's not so easy. And this was an event organized by EU IPO, so really high level, but also ERA, where I normally I'm very happy to be invited there, and I would love to be continue to be invited there. But I wanted to. ERA is the European Academy, the Academy of European Law, and once a year they have a whole seminar dedicated to copyright. And I thought this is the moment to start the discussion, and they didn't see it. Yeah, so it's not so easy to start this conversation. Any ideas?
Well, I'm hoping it starts at law school.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, lawyers are backward looking by our training,
yeah,
right? We're trained to look
yeah,
backwards.
yeah.
And so we look at, the great development of technologies in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we say, look, all that was based on IP. Here's the patent. And we learn that tool inside and out. What we don't learn is that the world has changed.
Yeah.
AI is going to be changing this, the multidisciplinary. So we know this. So the researchers know it, the clients know it, because that's how they're doing things. But they're getting advice from someone who's looking backwards. So we really, you need more people who've been in the lab, more
Mm.
people who are talking to researchers. So setting up forum where this is how I actually do research. These
Yeah.
are my needs. And so lawyers, are smart people. We can adapt, but we have to be told, like, you putting up this IP barrier is actually undermining my ability to do research or increasing my costs. And once they realize that, once they hear from real researchers, they can hopefully adapt. We're bringing this to the OECD in April, where
Yeah.
you are invited speaker, to try and talk about how do we use openness as a base and still have commercialization of products. So we need lots more conversations, but I think it's the interdisciplinary aspect that's missing, is that, we're building an open science preclinical platform to test out the cognitive effect of drugs and try to,
Mhm.
right? So most drugs fail for Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever, in phase 3 after you spent $1 billion. We think we can build a platform in the preclinical stage, but we're doing it openly because we've got so many different groups, so many
Mm.
different technologies that if we actually had to negotiate IP, it would be 20 years from now before it gets out. And so the researchers recognize that. And we just have to go to the IP people and said, look, you've got to develop strategies that help us achieve our goals. So I think those conversations are critical.
Excellent. Thank you so much. There was, when you talked about cash, I received
Yeah.
another question. So your cash example clearly shows that governance structures are key to making OS partnerships work.
Yeah.
From your experience, what are the most important governance elements that help build trust and align incentives between academia, public, and private partners? Hmm.
Right. So basically whatever you start with will not be what you end up with.
Mm.
That's, I think that's a basic premise of any corporate entity, that you dream up a governance structure based on past experience and you change it. So there has to be flexibility. There has to be rules about entry exit. There have to be within the governance structures clear ways to modify it where the executive will bring to the board this isn't working so well. We need to modify it, right? You find out your incentive structures are right or wrong. How do I modify it? Maybe you have the wrong people on the governance board. Maybe they don't have the right incentive to participate, right? They're just as happy saying no as saying yes. So it's an adjustment process. It's identifying people who have buy-in to the idea, who are committed to the cause, but also has the right level of authority and have responsibility. They can't get away with saying no. If they say no, there's got to be a negative consequence. So the governance structure, I mean, there are different kinds, right? You can set up a single entity, a joint venture, a corporate joint venture, and you equip it with the ability to make decisions. It owns the IP, distributes the benefits. But many of these are less formal, where you set up, they're a contractual joint venture where you have rules of governance. They're a little bit harder to manage. But you need someone at the hub, or someone who's managing it. So Conscience takes on this role for cash, but you need some organization like that who is dedicated to the cause. These are often nonprofits. And in order to build trust, that's often critically important that the manager is not associated with any one of the entities. Transparency is incredibly important. That builds trust. It's not only the trust of the people participating, but of the general community. The other thing that we have done a number of times, we're doing this for Nucleus, which is run by a for-profit corporation called Be Next in synthetic biology, and we did this for the Montreal Neuro, we're doing it for Trident, is we had an independent group, I led it, where we interviewed the community members who are participating. Sometimes it's a restricted community, one institution, but something like Be Next is all across the world. We make sure we get senior people, junior people, different roles, and confidentially go through, we do a qualitative study. We ask them a series of questions to understand, what do you think OS is? Why are you participating? What are the fears you have? Will you participate? What criteria do you need? And we feed that back anonymously to the central hub so that when they can modify their program to ensure that there is trust. But having dialogue and constantly going back to your community, it's not that expensive, but it's critically important to building trust.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And one participant had to leave earlier, but she left me, Marie, she left me a question. I just share this now. She also liked you referring to not being an enemy. Yeah, so I read it to you. You have mentioned that IP is not an enemy of OS, but rather a means to make openness sustainable. So what policy or institutional changes would, in your view, help more organizations adopt OS as part of their IP strategy in the coming years? Oh.
Yeah, so technology valorization organizations, technology transfer organizations are usually underfunded, and we ask them a lot. So they need support, but the question should always be, what are you trying to achieve? Understanding that, getting the researcher to articulate it. So the current process says, tell us when you have an invention, you do an invention disclosure, and then we can talk about protecting it. But that's the wrong way to do it. There should be conversations going on, and it does require more staff, so that is an issue. I mean, maybe technology transfer officers have to go into the faculties, into the schools, and have a conversation about what's being developed. Maybe the associate dean of research can, what are promising things, and intervene early about thinking about how to get value out of this. Maybe it's through IP, maybe it's through going to the government and sharing it, maybe it is through a consortium. But you need to get there at that point, not when they finished coming up with their research. It's too late already. So we need to find ways to move up the conversation to the conception. When, a researcher says, I've got, these partners, we're all interested in doing this. How do we structure it? That's where we should be focusing our investment, not after the fact when it's already too late.
Excellent. And I think we made it to the hour. So normally we try to stick, I've learned this the hard way, stick to the hour. And as there are no more questions, yeah, Richard, I want to thank you so much, yeah, for having been here with us, for having delivered this great, very interesting, inspiring speech. Let's continue this conversation in Canada or in Europe, yeah. And thank you, definitely. Let's move forward.
Well, thank you so much. And I see my colleague Martin who's at McGill, but also in Switzerland, is online. But thank you so much. And yes, this is a conversation I look forward to. And I was really happy to be part of IP4OS. I think it's a great initiative.
Thank you, Richard. Have a great day back in Canada and speak to you very soon. Looking forward
Okay,
to it. Thank
take care.
you. Thank
Bye,
you very
everyone.
much. Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.